The Great War between Ukraine and Russia continues with all its reality. Ukrainian and Russian forces are pushing all their borders as they try to establish superiority against each other. The Russian army is about to deplete its stock of missiles and ammunition to block the advance of the Ukrainian forces. As a result of deep research, the Ukrainian intelligence found that the Russian army did not have the ammunition to continue the war for much longer. After these findings, the Ukrainian forces want to take their steps more firmly and pass the period when the Russians will use their ammunition more carefully, with less loss. In addition, the Ukrainian army wants to protect the lands they took back from the Russians and to take back the specified regions due to the decrease in the Russian military density in some temporarily occupied regions. Ukrainian military officials stated that Russian forces may concentrate some unspecified forces for offensive or demonstration operations in the Zaporizhia Oblast. Yevhen Yerin, head of the Ukrainian Joint Press Center of the Tabrisk Direction Defense Forces, stated that Russian forces are gathering in unspecified areas that may be formations for an offensive operation. Yerin noted that this group has changed positions from time to time, but the Russian command has not yet chosen a specific operational direction. Local officials appointed by the Kremlin government pointed out that Russian forces have completed the construction of fortifications along the Zaporizhia Oblast front line. Ukrainian officials said in their report that Russian forces had gathered a lot of military equipment in the city, as if they are preparing for the war of the century. In the Kherson region, Ukrainian Southern Defense Forces spokesperson Natalia Humanyuk stated that the Russian forces continue to lose their positions in unspecified areas, while the Ukrainian forces continued their artillery fire to prevent additional personnel from reinforcing the advanced Russian groups. There are major clashes between the soldiers of the two sides on the Svatovo-Kramina line and the Donetsk line, which are the regions with the highest military density. The Ukrainian army prevented the Russian troops from advancing along the Svatovo-Kramina line and the Donetsk line, where the Russian troops wanted to advance. However, Ukraine was not the only one who wanted to thwart Russian forces throughout the war. NATO wants to completely prevent Russian President Vladimir Putin's threats and aggressive stance on Eastern Europe and the Baltic countries. This is a necessary move for peace in Europe and the Baltics and for world peace. For a long time, frictions between Russia and NATO continue over the Baltic Sea, while the Ukrainian army is blockading Russians in various regions on Ukrainian soil. NATO is trying to prevent Russian activities in the Baltic Sea. The most important region for Russia in the Baltic is undoubtedly Kaliningrad. Recently, the NATO Navy and armies conducted large-scale exercises both in the Baltic Sea and at the Suwalki Pass in Poland. NATO exercises to limit the aggressive movements of the Russian Navy and to meet the defense needs of the Allied forces infuriated Putin. After these moves, the Russian Air Force flew 80 meters above the NATO Navy several times and made dangerous moves. Subsequently, the Russian Baltic Fleet held a large-scale exercise last week to defend Kaliningrad. This attracted attention in NATO backstage. Later, the Russian army sent its most powerful weapons, fighter jets, to Kaliningrad and equipped the bases there with the heaviest war machines. The small city, which does not border with the Russian Federation, was capable of disturbing all the peace in Europe and must be constantly kept under control. Another encounter between NATO and Russia took place this week. A group of Russian warplanes flying close to NATO airspace borders near Kaliningrad drew attention. After Russian aircraft emerged as a potential threat to NATO, NATO aircraft, including the US-made F-35, took off to identify and intercept Russian aircraft. It was deployed in 2021 when some of the NATO F-35 fighters were sent to Estonia to perform patrol duties over the Baltic Sea. However, the deterrence of the Russian Air Force in the face of such provocations is of extra importance. The video footage showed that the US-made F-35 fighter jet was simply approaching the Russian Su-27P fighter and pushed it in front of the JAS-39 Gripen fighter, which can be seen in the first seconds of the video. Although there's not much detail on this subject, it has been determined that NATO forces reacted quickly to this provocation by the Russian Air Force in the Baltic Sea. With the escalation of tensions in the region, NATO forces on the outskirts of the Baltic Sea increased the level of alert. Russian forces are under NATO blockade in the Baltic Sea while Russian troops on Ukrainian territory are under a Ukrainian army blockade. Following the rise of NATO's activities in the Baltic Sea, Kaliningrad became of extra importance to the Kremlin government. In order to intimidate Russia's activities in the Baltic Sea, NATO member states and Finland held a large-scale exercise there. Following Finland's rapprochement with NATO, the Finnish Navy stepped up its main exercises in the Gulf of Finland and the Archipelago Sea. The purpose of the exercises is to conduct an international joint operation off the Finnish coast and in the Baltic waters, and to train military sailors to provide and receive international assistance. In addition, the agreement between Finland and Estonia to establish and activate mutual coastal defense systems was to control the activities of the Russian Baltic Fleet in St. Petersburg and to create a deterrent. Among others, 23 warships, as well as technical fleet ships and naval and infantry detachments participated in the exercises. About 5,000 military personnel participated in these exercises. The exercises carried out by the Finnish Navy lasted more than a week. Within the scope of joint exercises with NATO member countries, the Finnish Navy was accompanied by armies from France, Germany, Sweden, and the USA. During the exercise, a large increase in flight activity was seen in southern Finland and the northern Baltic Sea. As multiple military movements continued in the Baltic Sea, 2 Russian warplanes took an unsafe and unprofessional approach towards the UK-led permanent NATO Naval Group 1, which was conducting routine operations in the Baltic Sea. Russian pilots were unable to respond to NATO forces' constant interrogation communications, and the force flew at an altitude of 300 feet and at a distance of 80 meters. NATO described the interaction as unsafe and unprofessional because it was conducted in a known danger zone activated for air defense training and due to aircraft height and proximity. The incorrect interaction of Russian forces with NATO forces increased the risk of miscalculations, errors, and accidents. NATO forces acted responsibly, fulfilling their mission in full compliance with international air and sea regulations. NATO stated that it will respond appropriately to any interference with NATO's legal activities in the region that jeopardizes the safety of our aircraft, ships, or crews. NATO stated that they do not see conflict and do not pose a threat. Due to the dangerous convergence of Russia and NATO in the Baltic Sea and the Kaliningrad region, retired Russian Admiral Sivkov pointed out that there is a high probability of significant developments in the Baltic and Kaliningrad in 2023, and even a major war between NATO and Russia. Admiral Sivkov argued that Poland was preparing to enter Kaliningrad. This is really more than just nonsense. Sivkov stated that considering the inevitable conflict with NATO in the near future, Russia should produce more powerful and modern weapons systems. Jacek Siewiera, head of the National Security Bureau under Polish President Andrzej Duda, said, "There are alarming signs that new flight routes to Kaliningrad are being established. Measures at the border, a clear message to Moscow." The paranoid statements of the retired Russian general are not the kind of actions that will take place unless Russia takes a very serious and provocative action, because Kaliningrad is a potential danger that could actually start the Third World War. Despite Russia's provocative actions, NATO chooses to act wisely and professionally. We believe that NATO and its allies will continue with their stance in the future. This is an attitude that should be for the peace of all Europe and the Baltics, but the necessary political, military, diplomatic, and economic answers should always be given to Putin's overly aggressive attitudes. Thanks for watching.